Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm Michael Shermer, the host. As you'll see, we have a new, slightly modified studio backdrop. This is a scan of a flower by Katinka Madsen. That is our new backdrop, at least for this episode, and maybe hopefully for a few others. And just kind of trying to spiff up the studio here. And Katinka is, along with John Brockman, run Brockman Inc., who is my literary agent, the agency of many of the science writers you're probably familiar with. Anyway, she does this art on the side. It's beautiful. I was pleased to purchase this and you put it to good use. And as always, thank you for the support of the podcast, which generally goes with support of the Skeptic Society. We're a 501c3 nonprofit science education organization, and this is what we do. Trying to keep up with the rapidly changing digital world. So having a podcast and trying to expand our horizons. I've been mostly doing science books by scientists and science writers. But I want to expand that and do more nonfiction books, history books, philosophy, and other subjects. So to that extent, watch this space. My guest for today is William Poundstone, the Doomsday Calculation, how an equation that predicts the future is transforming everything we know about life and the universe. So this is the famous calculation that of when the world's going to end, expanded to a whole bunch of other subjects, as you'll hear. How long a relationship will last, how long a company will last on the stock market, whether we live in the multiverse, if there's extraterrestrial intelligence out there, will AI spell the doom of us or nukes or whatever. You can make the Doomsday Calculation very specific. These are all Bayesian calculations under great uncertainty. And that's what we're after with this. William is a great writer. He's a science writer with a good, strong background in the physical and mathematical sciences. And so his writing is really, it's not just good, it's also funny, it's clever. And I really enjoyed reading this book as well as his other books. As you'll know from the start of this podcast, he was also one of the biographers of Carl Sagan. So he knows that subject as well. So we talk about that a little bit and get into all these subjects and related to that. So with that, I give you William Poundstone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming on the show. Congratulations on the new book. It is The Doomsday Calculation, how an equation that predicts the future is transforming everything we know about life and the universe. Well, that's a big subject. Before we dive into that, I do want to just show how diverse your mind is by mentioning a few of your other books. But before we even get into that, I noticed that it's 20 years of the celebration of your biography of Carl Sagan. And,
yeah, exactly.
And you and Keith Davidson both came out pretty close to the same publishing season in that same year, 1999, which I think it was
in like the same week, actually.
Yeah, 3 years after Carl's death. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. There's going to be 100 Carl Sagan biographies because he was so famous. But in fact, I don't think there's been any others since yours.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
No, there hasn't.
Yeah,
as far as I know, there hasn't. Yeah.
Why is that, considering his influence and continued reach? I mean, he was dead before there was the internet presence of everybody having a digital footprint, and yet he has a huge digital footprint.
Yeah, exactly. I really don't know, other than that maybe people are just reading his books, and that's maybe the best memorial. Yeah,
that's true. I haven't followed it that closely. Have there been any new archival materials or letters or anything that's come out since you researched all that?
Not that I know. I've kind of been watching for that, but there hasn't been, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. It would just be interesting to know, because biography is very dependent upon context, and yours and Key's biographies were so soon after his death. You wonder 20 years after the fact if, the way history unfolded, in history of science anyway, maybe, puts his influence in context. Same thing with Gould, because Gould died in 2001, I think it was, 2002 maybe. And, the debates march on, and you wonder what would Sagan say about this or that? What would Gould say about this or that debate? Of course, we'll never know. But and then some of your other books, just to give our listeners an idea of how your brain works. I mean, you are all over the place. Not really all over the place, but You did a book on the prisoner's dilemma, John von
Yeah.
Neumann, game theory, and the puzzle of the bomb. So there you're talking about the logic behind mutual assured destruction and all that, which still is still working.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Big Book of Big Secrets. How would you move Mount Fuji? Microsoft's Cult of the Puzzle. How the world's smartest companies select the most creative thinkers. Fortune's Formula. The untold story of the scientific betting system that beat casinos and Wall Street. Gaming the vote. Why elections aren't fair. That seems relevant again.
Yeah.
After, we're taping this on the night after the first Democratic debate, and tonight's the next one. Let's see. Are you smart enough to work at Google? Rock beat scissors, the practical guide to outguessing and outwitting almost everybody. So your mind works in the direction of in this sort of puzzle solving, creativity, intellectual, cognitive style, and how people and companies think differently, and what we can learn from that. So I take it the Doomsday Calculation is something of an extension of your previous work.
Yeah, exactly. In a way, it's about a puzzle. It's about one of the greatest controversies in the philosophy of science nowadays. And I've always said that a good way to write a popular science book is to find some topic where you have very smart people disagreeing. Because then you've automatically got the conflict, which you need for a good story. And if they're, disagreeing about it, it must mean they think it's pretty darn important. And in this case, it's, I guess, as important as anything could be, the end of the human race. So
yeah, here's a list of the topics you cover. How likely is it that intelligent extraterrestrial life exists? How much longer will your romance last? How likely is it that we're living in the Matrix-like simulation? How does Warren Buffett continue to beat the stock market? How likely is it that we're living in a multiverse? And how much longer is humanity likely to last? Now, most people, when they encounter these particular puzzles, are used to books about specific things like nuclear weapons and how many we have and that sort of thing. This is a different kind of way to think about, let's just take that one, how much longer has humanity got to live? These are sort of thought experiments based on the fact we have so little specific information to plug into a formula. So is there some other way we can come at it? So walk us through, how the original people behind this calculation, as it were, came up with this thought experiment and what we can derive from that.
Well, the story I like to tell is J. Richard Gott, who's a Princeton astrophysicist, well known for his work in cosmology. But back in 1969, he was just out of Harvard, a physics undergraduate, and he took a really cheap trip to Europe, but he managed to go to all these different great places. And one of the places he went to was Berlin, and he went to the Berlin Wall. So he was looking at the wall with his college friend, and he announced a prediction that the Berlin Wall would stand for at least 2 2/3 more years, but no more than 24 more years. And he went back to America and went about his graduate work and so forth. But of course, as we well know, eventually they did tear down the wall. So he called up his college friend and said, "Turn on the TV. They're tearing down the Berlin Wall. You remember that prediction I made?" And this was 21 years after his prediction within that time frame.
Right.
So he thought, well, gee, this idea I had really works. Maybe I should write it up. And he managed to get it published in Nature, which of course is what everyone's dream of publishing. But in Nature, he didn't talk about the Berlin Wall. He talked about the fate of humanity itself. And his argument is essentially this. We can regard ourselves as being kind of random observers of the human condition. So imagine you have a master list of every human who ever lived or ever will live. So obviously it's a very big list. And I'm kind of wondering, where's my name in that list? Well, I really don't know. I know I'm not Adam and Eve, but I could be very early in that list if we have a long future ahead of us. And maybe if the human race settles on other planets, there could be a huge population in the future, in which case, proportionally, I'd be very near the beginning of that list. But on the other, more pessimistic hand, it could be that I'm living right before Doomsday. It could be that something is just catastrophic, is just about to happen, and it'll turn out that I was one of the very last people. So I really don't know whether I'm in the first half of that list or the second half of that list. And in fact, because I'm so ignorant of my relative position, I can say, well, there's a 50% chance I'm in the first half of the list, 50% chance of the second half of the list. Now, there's one more fact I know. As Scott pointed out, there are demographers who try to estimate what they call the cumulative population. Now, this is the total head count of everyone who lived from the earliest humans up to the present day. And at his time, that was estimated to be about 70 billion. Today, it's probably closer to 100 billion.
Yeah, I've seen 100, yeah.
So if you use that, figure I'm in the second half of that list, which I don't know I am, but 50% possibility. In that case, I would know there's 100 billion people behind me, and there has to be less than 100 billion people in the future because I'm in the second half of the list. So I can say there's a 50% chance that the number of people yet to be born is less than 100 billion. Now, let's say I'd rather have that in years rather than births. Well, the current birth rate is about 130 million people a year. So if you divide that, you find that it would only take about 760 years to produce another 100 billion people. So based on that, I can say there's a 50% chance that the human race will be extinct within the next 760 years. Now, that's kind of a shocking thing, although I guess shocking is relative. As I say, one of the things I've found the past 2 years, I've been talking about doomsday with everyone I meet, and people ask what you're writing about, and I talk about it. And when I say it predicts a 50-50 chance of human extinction in 760 years, I'm mostly surprised that people think, oh, I thought it was going to be a lot worse than that. They say, well, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect my grandchildren. So maybe that's not so terrible. But of course, taking a larger view, many of us would like to think that the human race has a very long future. Most mammal species last about 1 million years or so. So it is kind of a shocking prediction. And basically, it was that Nature paper that started this whole controversy, which, as I say, still produces, several papers a year.
So let's just take the spine of your book here and say, before let's say this is 50,000 years ago, and here's the present. So 100 billion people lived and died before us. There's 7.5 billion. So we're just like right there.
Yeah, about 7% of everyone who ever lived is living right now.
Right. So the question is how much further can we take it out here? All this formula does is say, well, let's just double that. So it would make it, another. How long would it take to get another 100 billion? Well, to get there, how much time is that? That's 760 years.
Yeah.
And that's the 50-50, 50% chance that we're here and we've got 760 years to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But of course, this doesn't take into account maybe we become a multiplanetary species. If Elon Musk has his way, we're living on Mars and we're colonizing it by 2050 or so.
Well, in a certain sense, it does, because you're imagining the total list of everyone in the human race, present, past, and future. So if we're destined to be on Mars, it includes the names of the Mars people.
Okay.
If we're destined to go to Alpha Centauri, it would include that.
Yeah, but there you can, it feels like it could extend indefinitely, because an extinction event here would not be an extinction event at the same time on Mars, say, unless the sun went supernova or something like that.
Absolutely.
And if we're interstellar and 1,000 years from now, then we're even more protected from going extinct. Although I suppose you could make the argument by the time we're interstellar, those are isolated populations, reproductively isolated populations, which by definition makes them a different species. So they're no longer really Homo sapiens.
Yeah, while you were mentioning Carl Sagan, Gott actually had a conversation with Carl Sagan where he convinced him that there's a very good reason to go to Mars and build cities there, that it would be this kind of insurance policy against doomsday. And he said he managed to convince Sagan of that.
I think that's right. And that's of course, Elon's initial statement about going to Mars was just in case, as a backup. Of course, there's other reasons to go because it's cool and we like exploring things, and we also like colonizing things and taking other stuff. And also, just to distinguish this from the Doomsday Clock, everybody's relatively familiar because they held a press conference and they moved the clock ever closer to midnight. I think it's 2.5 minutes to midnight now, something like that. Worse than it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, because they factored in global climate change and so on. But those kind of calculations that they do, how many nukes there are, or how many parts per million of CO2 gas that's going to lead to the melting of the polar ice caps and so on, that could you count that into the formula that is the Bayesian, what are called priors to get your Bayesian calculation?
Yes, absolutely you can. There's an alternate formulation of the doomsday argument that was devised by the physicist Brandon Carter and the philosopher John Leslie. Now, in this, you start with your own prior probability of what you think the chances of doomsday are, and this can factor in specific threats like nuclear war, climate change, anything that concerns you. And then you can use the additional information of our position in time, our birth rank, the 100 billion people, to adjust that. One of the things you find, though, is that doesn't really give an easy out. Usually that leads to an even more pessimistic forecast than does Gott's version of it.
Yeah, so walk us through the historical debate over this doomsday calculation. You mentioned God is kind of laying out the foundation, and then Leslie, and you bring up Tipler. I love that you make the reference that I devoted a chapter in my book on weird things to Tipler alone. He is out there. But on the other hand, maybe you need people that are out there once in a while to come up with some crazy stuff. People like Freeman Dyson comes up with stuff off the wall that he's probably usually wrong, but you never know. So since this was first formulated, what year was that Nature paper? That was
1993.
93, right. So since then, you have a whole chapter on like the 12 things wrong with the with Gott's argument, and yet no one's actually really been able to pinpoint exactly what's wrong with it.
That's what makes it so fascinating. I mean, mostly you write papers to prove someone is wrong, and literally 80-some people have done that with various ingenious but different reasons why they think it's wrong. So I kind of break it down into 12 of the common themes. I think the one that almost everyone starts with is, I'm not random. I mean, God is saying you can regard yourself as a random sample from all the human beings, and it's natural to say that doesn't apply to me, it applies to other people, but I'm a unique person. But these really aren't mutually exclusive things. God says you can use basically the same logic to make predictions like, you were probably not in the, you're probably in the middle 95% of the phone book. In other words, you're not in the A's, you're not in the Z's. And that's true of you, Michael Shermer. It's true of me, William Poundstone. Now, if my name was Abernathy, I would realize that, yes, it doesn't apply to me, but I can see that it does apply to 95% of all people. So what the doomsday people are saying essentially is it's not inconceivable that we are very early in human history. It's just unlikely. And even if we do turn out to be very early, you can still look at these people in the future and say, yeah, I can see that 95% of those people will be living relatively close to doomsday based on the doomsday range that they give. So it is something where you can really see it playing out, that it is true of most people. You just resist translating that into a statement of probability about yourself. It's easy to say if the chance of having an accident if you're riding a scooter without a helmet is such and such a percent, and we've verified that from the statistics of all the people who've been riding it. But you think, but I'm not going to wear a helmet. I don't need it. I'm not like those other people. So there is a sense psychologically, I think, in which we always assume that the statistics don't apply to us. Yeah. And maybe that's good in a way, as you say. You need people who try daring new things, even if the odds are against it. But that's kind of human nature. And that's what Gott is sort of showing us, that we should be aware that you may be more random than you think.
This is the Copernican principle, that I'm not
Yes.
special. Right. Here, I'll tell you how I used it in my last book, Heavens on Earth, in which I talked about all the different theories of, well, first of all, the religious versions of the afterlife. And, they all religions think they're the chosen ones. We're the generation that's going to be born again and so on, and resurrected. And then all the scientific versions. And I really get into Ray Kurzweil and the singularity. And to me, when I first heard about the singularity and it's coming by 2030, 2035, 2040, gets pushed off a little bit, but it's always within Ray's lifetime. And for a skeptic like me that's studied these things in other areas, that set off my skeptical alarms. Like, why is it always in my lifetime that the big thing is going to happen? So I call that the Ptolemaic Principle, the belief, like its namesakes, that we are not only at the center of the universe, but are specially created, chosen people living at a unique time in history. People have always embraced the Ptolemaic Principle, but it's gainsaid by the Copernican Principle, which, pace its namesake, holds that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. The solar system is not the center of our galaxy is not the center of the universe. Humans are not specially created apart from all other animals, and we are not living in the most important time in history. So I didn't pursue it as far as you, because that would be kind of a diversion from what I was after here, but then I say, recall, too, the Mediocrity Principle, which states that an item selected at random from a population is most likely to have come from the most numerous type of those items. Reach into a bag containing 1,000 ping pong balls, 900 of which are white, 100 of which are black. The chances are pretty good, 90% in fact, that you'll select a white ball. Pluck somebody at random, and chances are that that person will represent the population at large. Select any generation of humans from the past, and they are likely to resemble those who came just before or after them. Everyone feels special, and everyone generation believes they are living in special times. But statistically speaking, this cannot be true. Thus, the chances that even a science-based prophecy such as those proffered by cryonicists, extropians, transhumanists, singularitarians, and mind uploaders will come true is highly unlikely. On the other hand, they could say, well, somebody could be first. Someone has to be first.
Well, that's a common objection to the doomsday argument. You can say someone's got to be early in the human race, so why can't it be us?
Right.
And no one's saying it isn't, but we'd be pretty lucky if that's the case.
Right. I mean,
but you do raise an interesting point about the Copernican principle. Basically, most of the people who have advanced the doomsday argument are astrophysicists or cosmologists.
I noticed that.
Because they're very used to thinking in that way.
Right.
And all the doomsday argument basically does is translate that into time as opposed to space. We're assuming we're at a non-special place in time as well as a non-special place in space.
Much like the extraterrestrial argument, are they out there? Where is everybody? The Fermi Paradox, which you cover in a chapter. To our listeners not familiar with that, that's Enrico Fermi's thought experiment, I think it was in the 50s, that, given the rate of technological progress and cultural progress, scientific progress, and so forth, and that we're not special, it's likely that, that there's other ETs out there, some behind us, some ahead of us. If they were only slightly ahead of us, biologically speaking, that could be 10,000 years, 100,000, a million years, on an evolutionary time scale, which culturally would translate into something like self-replicating robotic spacecraft that go out and populate the galaxy. And then they do all these calculations, the SETI people, how long would it take to populate the entire Milky Way galaxy? You could do it in a few million years, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if we're not special, if we're in the middle somewhere, and there's a bunch behind us, and we won't know about them because they can't achieve spaceflight yet, or radio technology or whatever. But if half are ahead of us, and if they're a few million years ahead of us, they should be here. They're not. Where is everybody? That's the exact kind of thought experiment you're talking about here, right?
Yes, exactly. And this was an area where sort of my opinions changed a lot in talking to a lot of these people. There at the dawn of the space age, pretty much everyone thought that there's life throughout the universe, there's intelligent life throughout the universe. And this was partly because of the Miller-Urey experiments, where they showed you can take very simple gases, give them ultraviolet light or electrical discharge, and you'll produce the same amino acids that are in proteins. You can produce some of the bases in DNA. So it seemed like it was just a small leap from that to living things. So that's where you started having this idea that there have to be lots and lots of intelligent beings out there. And Carl Sagan, of course, was one of the greatest exponents of that idea, that life is very, very common. And yet we, so far at least, haven't found any evidence of that. Well, some people are pointing out, such as Nick Bostrom, Brandon Carter, that we really don't have a good handle on how probable the origin of life was on Earth. Now, of course, we came out of this theocratic tradition where we were told this was a divine thing, and we were kind of getting away from that. So it was very appealing to have the idea, yes, it's really simple chemistry, the right chemicals, it'll happen almost immediately. So it was very easy to believe from the Miller-Urey experiments that, that would mean that life was a very common thing. And as Sagan said, we don't have a lot of data, we just have one planet. But so far, it's 1-for-1 on life originating on a suitable planet. And we're sure that there's other planets out there that have similar, chemicals and conditions, so there should be lots of life. But Francis Crick, actually, was one who made the counter-argument that we have to be aware there's a selection effect. We necessarily are having this conversation, this podcast, on a planet where intelligent life did arise. Otherwise, there would be nothing here. So you have to figure that the fact that we find our own planet has intelligent life really doesn't give us any information we can use statistically. All it tells us is that life is not such a fantastically rare thing that it never happens in the whole universe. But if you want to distinguish between the life is common hypothesis and the hypothesis that life may be very, very rare, we really don't have any Bayesian leverage to do that just from our own experience. So what people like Nick Bostrom are saying is that this is an area where we should say we really don't know. We don't have the information yet to say whether life is common. But this is really one of the best kind of open questions for scientists because we have a real shot at answering this in the not too distant future. I mean, we're talking about sending these probes to Europa and other satellites in the outer solar system that really may have oceans under ice, and conceivably have life there. We're talking about going back to Mars with better probes. There's even talk of using the spectra from exoplanets to maybe get an idea whether there's something associated with life there. So it's quite possible in the next 50 years or so we could have we could conceivably discover life in our solar system, and this would then answer the question. But until that happens, I think maybe the most reasonable thing is to admit we really don't know.
Right. But the whole point of these calculations that you're doing in these different areas is that even if we don't know, we can still do these thought experiments to kind of wrap our mind around it. So one answer to the Fermi Paradox is we're first. Somebody has to be first. Somebody has to be Abercrombie or Ace Ace Abercrombie.
Pest and termite.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever would make you the first one in the alphabet, somebody's got to be first.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one legitimate one, although Carl also pointed out that, life arose pretty quickly after the cooling down period. Mm-hmm. I forget what that's called, the bombardment period or something of Earth, maybe within 500 million years. So you're talking 4.6 billion. Certainly by 3.5, there was already complex cells. So probably by maybe 4 billion or so, there was probably something like the RNA world. You're getting fairly sophisticated machinery at a microscopic level pretty quickly after the cooling off period, which would imply that it's a natural chemical process, assuming intelligent design theory is not entering into our equation here.
I was very impressed by that argument with Sagan's, certainly when I wrote the biography. But I've been impressed by Brandon Carter's argument, and there's a chapter on that in the book as well, that obviously it's a given that intelligent life arose on Earth since we're here. And if we assume that it does take a lot of evolving to get from first life to where we are, and evolving doesn't happen overnight, you would expect to find that life arose fairly early. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been enough time for intelligent life to arise before the sun became a red giant or something. So you can kind of undercut that argument, and maybe we can't infer quite as much as we'd like to just from the fact that life arose early.
Now, since Carl's death, there's been the discovery that pretty much every star has planets.
Yeah.
And so once you get that number pretty high, then the percentage of the planets within the habitable zone and not too eccentric orbit and, all the different Drake equation type things that cut down the probabilities of getting to intelligent life, that number starts to change. Would that be an example of changing your priors in a Bayesian calculation for the probabilities of there being extraterrestrial intelligence?
Yeah, exactly. Of the 7 Drake equation factors, we've learned an awful lot about the first 3 of them or so, including the fact that every star, it seems, has planets. So that makes it more likely that we would expect to find intelligent life. But by the same token, it makes the Fermi question all the more mysterious, because why aren't we seeing it?
Right. Yeah. Again, unless we're first or pretty close. Well, a decent answer seems to me it could still be relatively heavily populated galaxy, but even that, like say 10,000 civilizations or something, spread out over 100,000 light years wide of our galaxy, with each star 5 to 10 light years apart, you could still have a lot of extraterrestrial civilizations with a lot of empty space in between them, and that we just haven't encountered them yet.
Yeah, I think I calculated that if there were about 10,000 in our galaxy, the closest would likely be further away than any of the stars we can see in the sky's constellations. So it's pretty far away.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the vastness and the emptiness of space. My favorite example of that is the Voyager spacecraft traveling the fastest any human object has ever moved, going like, 70,000 miles an hour or something like that. No, I think it was 40,000 miles an hour. It wouldn't get to the nearest star, which it's not going to. But if it were going to Alpha Centauri, it would take 70,000 years to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, what? It's just inconceivable how empty the space is. Now, I just had Robert Zubrin on my show. We just posted that one on Tuesday. He's got a new book out called The Case for Space. He makes an interesting argument at the end of the book, the Sagan argument that life arises fairly early after a planet, but the earliest example we have is still pretty complex machinery at the cellular level, such that he thinks, now he's not going down the intelligent design route, but the panspermia route. That may, and even if it isn't an intelligent civilization, planting seeds around the galaxy, our solar system itself is moving through other solar systems as the galaxy spins, and that he has a calculation of how often we would come close to other stellar systems over hundreds of millions of years, and by chance you would get maybe some panspermia mixing between solar systems, something like that.
Yeah, I've always found panspermia kind of disappointing in a way. It kind of just kicks the can down the road, and you still have to ask, how did the other planet get it?
That's right, yeah. Where do those guys come from?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Well, and I think the intelligent design people have the same problem with whatever you call God or the intelligent designers, whatever it is. It could be an ET, a super advanced ET. You still have the problem, well, where do they come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So let's look at some of the other, I don't know. I was trying to remember if you came down on the doomsday argument, if you're comfortable with we have 760 years to go, or were you skeptical of that? I forget now.
Well, originally I thought it was completely crazy.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much anyone's objection. But as I understood what he was actually saying, it's a probability distribution, a very broad one. And people's intuition really is not very good for dealing with probability and probability distributions. I think that's why there's so many paradoxes that are based on probability theory. He's just saying the median prediction is 760 years, which means there's a 50% chance before that, and it could be, right now, in fact, or a 50% chance it's after that, and it could be a very, very long time after that.
A long tail of the curve going off into,
as they say in Wall Street.
Right.
So you have to be aware that he's not saying there's no chance that we'll have a very long future and we'll have this Star Trek future where we go to the planets and all. He's just saying there's a 50% chance we definitely won't, because we're not going to be doing that in the next 760 years.
Right. So it's 25 years for this. The theory's been bounced around again. Just to return to your chapter on the history of this whole debate. Where is it now? Are most physicists or scientists still skeptical, or do they think, yeah, that's a decent argument, or how many twists and turns on it have there been?
It's a little hard to tell because, I mean, there's obviously not a poll, and most of the people who write about it are still against it, trying to refute it. I think there has been a little traction for it, particularly in the astronomy cosmology community. And I think, of course, a lot of people still haven't heard of this, so I'm kind of hoping that the book will educate some people on it. But again, there's no consensus. It's still something where, tomorrow someone could pull the sword from the stone and have the perfect demonstration that is wrong or the perfect demonstration that is right. But so far, that hasn't happened.
Right. Or Kim Jong-un will launch his nukes and
yeah,
and that'll change our priors.
I'm afraid to be proven right for the wrong reason.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get on the Today Show or something like that, I would open with, how long will your romantic relationship last? Yes. So let's walk through that equation. I've been married 5 years as of technically Tuesday. No, Wednesday, yesterday. Today, we're recording this on a Thursday. Yesterday was my five-year anniversary. So I'm 5 years into this marriage. How much longer are we going to last? And does it matter how old I am or any of that? Or how do you parse those?
Well, it does kind of matter age. If the upper limit gets so long that it is over 70 years or something, where you start to get into human longevity,
right?
You would have to make a Bayesian adjustment for that. God has mostly used it for like celebrity marriages where the celebrities are pretty young and they're going to divorce long before, the Social Security age or something like that.
Right.
But the logic is basically this. If you want to make the type of prediction he did for the Berlin Wall, one just at 50% confidence, you can say that take the past duration of your relationship, multiply it by 1/3 and by 3. So if it's been 5 years, it would be 5/3 to 15 years. And he's saying there's a 50% chance your relationship will end in no less than 5/3 years and no more than 15 years. Now, the good news is there's a 75% chance, or there's a 25% chance that your relationship will last more than 15 years. And it could be a lot more than that. And also a 25% chance that your relationship ends even in less than 5/3 years.
Oh boy. Okay, honey, if you're listening to this, no. Well, but see here, the Bayesian priors. I mean, I was married before for 20 something years. So at this point, I'm never going to
help your track record.
Yeah. I'm never going to divorce, and I'm 64. So, in 15 years, I'm starting to hit the wall. So, but if I was 24, say, that would change it entirely. As you said, with these young celebrity marriages, they're not going to last. So, so there, the priors would.
He actually saw a People magazine saying the most famous couple in the world was Lady Di and Prince Charles when his article came out. So he thought, I'm going to predict that. And he made a prediction. And at the time, everyone thought, it's unthinkable for royals to divorce.
Right.
But of course they did, and within his prediction time. So
right. So my marriage is going to last we'll just take the outside, the 15 years. Another super interesting subject for your Today Show appearance. Why does Warren Buffett beat the market? And, how can I beat the market? What are my probabilities? Should I just put it in an index fund? Is there a secret sauce formula we should know about?
Well, yeah, I was quite surprised at that. I found that a version of Gott's Copernican method, as he calls it, is known as Lindy's Law, and it's used in financial management. And Lindy's Law basically says that companies that have been around a long time are likely to remain in business a long time. Managers that have been around a long time are likely to maintain a long time. And again, if a company has a long history of earnings or dividends, again, that's a good sign that will continue into the future. And if you use what's called the discounted cash flow method of valuing corporations, you would find that a company that has been around a long while should be worth a lot more than a very speculative company that, it might be the next Amazon, but you don't know that. And this is interesting because if you look at the way the stock market really works, they tend to value companies that have a good story. Things like Tesla or something where, this is going to be a disruptive technology. This business is going to take over this huge industry and so forth. And investors really respond to that, and they bid up the price of these companies that don't have a very long track record. Whereas you have these value companies that have been in business forever, like Coca-Cola, and maybe what they're doing isn't exciting and sexy and glamorous, but if Coke has been selling, brown, bubbly sugar water for 100 years, there's a good chance that they're going to be doing that for the next 100 years. And if they figured out how to make a profit and pay dividends for the past 80 years, there's a good chance that'll be happening in the future too. So as you say, it's interesting that if you look at what Warren Buffett does with Berkshire Hathaway, he tends to go after these very long-lived companies. And I have a chart in the book showing the Berkshire Hathaway holdings, and the vast majority of them are companies that have been around in many cases a century or more.
Like railroads.
So that does seem to be part of his success.
Yeah, it's I'm a big fan of Tesla. I drive one. I think it's great, but you would have never.
I do too.
Oh, great. Yeah. It's totally love it, but he could still go out of business, and you and I could be either we're screwed or or Ford buys Tesla or something like that. Hopefully would happen. But the industry itself, I mean, it's something of a mystery to me why it didn't take off decades ago. I mean, the stat I like to use is there was as many electric taxis in New York City in 1920 as there were internal combustion engine taxis. But for a variety of social, cultural, and marketing reasons, and maybe political, the fossil fuel industry, the rubber industry, the automobile industry, and in cahoots, or maybe not, whatever. They got a head start on that, and everyone who tried after that in the 80s and the 90s, even GM couldn't make it happen. So it is something of a mystery why it was Elon that did it, other than he made it a cool, fun, sexy toy instead of a geeky looking box. That the old GM cars were, or kind of weird looking, spacey, space age looking cars, which were too weird for the average person to want. He seemed to have, found that right window of, and also maybe the battery technology came online around that time. I'm not sure about that, but as an investor,
changed a lot.
Yeah. But somebody like Warren Buffett would probably never invest in Tesla. I mean, my discount brokerage firm, Schwab, they have it listed as an F company. Still F. That's the lowest. And my guys there keep telling me, Shermer, you got to sell that Tesla. It's like, no, but I love Tesla. It's like it's a dog of a company. It's like, oh my God. Of course, you could have said that about Amazon. They were losing money for 20 years, and now they're richer than Apple, I think. And again, so how you plug in the priors, and then all of a sudden these things take off. There's still something of a question mark and a mystery about it, regardless of how you use these formulas to predict the future.
Well, actually, there's a chart in the book of companies that were founded the same year as Amazon, and charting how many are still in business each successive year. And again, you find that that the curve, it's kind of is exactly what you'd predict with Gott's Copernican method. So when you have a lot of different companies, some of them successful, some of them not, you really find that this same math applies.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And this gets us into the whole question of AI. I mean, it would be good as an investor to predict which of the AI companies, other than I suppose Google and Amazon now, maybe Twitter, something like that, is going to succeed. But let's just talk about the doomsday fear about AI. You followed these arguments that the Bostrom. I read his book. What was the title of Bostrom's book about?
Superintelligence.
Superintelligence, and then there was another one by a journalist on Our Last Invention, I think it was called. I've read through those arguments. They're pretty good arguments. And then I read someone like Steve Pinker in his Enlightenment Now. He has a whole section on threats to human progress, and he makes the argument, well, they said that about AI back, with Y2K, nothing happened. And well, what about jobs? Well, what happened to the 200,000 employees of the telephone companies that were switchboard operators? They're all gone, but they just got jobs elsewhere. Or tens of thousands of people in elevators that were, the elevator operators. Those jobs are gone, and yet, there wasn't massive unemployment. So you get these kind of back and forth. tell us where, how these kinds of calculations or thought experiments help us think through those arguments about AI.
Yeah, well, of course, there's a distinction between the economic consequences of AI, I mean, people losing jobs and so forth, and what Bostrom is mostly talking about, which is literal extinction risk, that there'll be some sort of horrible, miscalculation, and it'll result in the end of the human race. Now, he isn't saying that this is going to happen. He is saying this is a case where it's very hard to assign probabilities. And you can certainly conceive these scenarios, these thought experiments where something could go wrong. And we have to be very conservative about this and say, even if we think there's a 10% chance that AI is going to be the end of the human race, that's a pretty big deal. And we have to make sure that we raise the odds there. So that's basically what he's talking about, I think.
Well, that's not dissimilar to the space arguments that that there's a small probability of an asteroid impact on the level of what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. I forget what the calculation is, but like once every 65 million years, I suppose. But you can even have something. You could have a civilization ending one much smaller than that, which would be like every 200,000 years or something like that. That alone would be the similar argument for funding a program to track intersecting asteroids.
Yeah. And the problem is that if it's a threat that we haven't dealt with, it's very hard to convince people that it makes sense to worry about this, to spend money on it, and so forth. We tend to fight the last war. And if it's something we can see, like there was in Hiroshima, so we can kind of appreciate that nuclear war is something we have to worry about. But when you talk about an asteroid strike or AI, it's much harder to convince the average person.
Right. Bostrom's argument, of course, that's been countered. Let's go through the matrix. Are we living in a simulation? I think Bostrom's written about this as well. Max Tegmark's. I think Max put it at 50% probability, and I think as did Bostrom. They're getting this 50% probability argument from the original argument that got made, right? 50% is maximum uncertainty, and that's where you begin. And if you can't nudge it either way, you end up at that level of uncertainty.
Yeah, the argument is this. You imagine that an advanced society might have simulations that would be absolutely indistinguishable from regular human consciousness. And they might have lots of these simulations. I mean, if you're a gamer today, you probably have 20 avatars. You probably play these games all the time. So that little universe is being simulated hundreds and hundreds of times. But by definition, there can only be one real world. So if you think that an advanced society might be able to create, millions and millions of simulations, the simulations would far outnumber the real world. So if you say, I don't know whether I'm a real person or a simulation, then you have to say, well, if the simulations are likely to far outnumber the real people, then the odds are I'm a simulation. And that's known as the simulation hypothesis. It's another one of these great puzzles, and people try to find a way of saying that why this isn't true or why we should believe this.
What is the argument against it?
Well, I give one in the book. It's that if you consider what sort of Bayesian information we have, all we really know is that we're living in a society and a world in which we don't see that simulation technology has even been invented. Now, it could be that a future society is simulating the past, and we're part of that past. But still, you have to figure there's two possibilities here. It could be that simulations are just this pipe dream, they're never going to happen, in which case we would, of course, find ourselves living in a world in which there are no simulations. But on the other hand, it could be that someday they will create these simulations. And in that case, you have to figure that most of these simulations would be of a recent past in which there was simulation technology. The example Gott gives, movies are a kind of simulation, and most movies are set not in the Stone Age, but in either the present day or at least the recent past when movies existed. Most of the TV shows are set in epochs when television existed. I mean, you can have Game of Thrones, but that's pretty unusual. Usually it's more like Friends or something, and they watch TV on TV.
Right.
So most of the simulations would probably be of past times when there was simulation technology, because this would have been a time when there was a huge population, since you probably would have needed planet-sized computers in order to create these simulations. So when you take all that into account, you can make a case, a Bayesian case, that yes, our evidence of living before simulations is a reason to think that probably there are not going to be simulations, and probably I'm not a simulation.
Right. Who was it?
I don't know about you.
Who was it that made the argument that, because I like this one, is that you would think if we were living in a simulation, we would see some pixelation once in a while, or a little buffering, or there would be some flaws in the system, sort of like in the Matrix, where what's that? I forget the guy, the Keanu Reeves character's name, who sees a cat or something, and they go, "You weren't supposed to see the cat."
Yeah,
little glitches in the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, every now and then there is a paper published in a serious physics journal, supposedly saying this is how you discover if we're in a simulation. And it is, again, looking for the pixelation of physics, right. Usually at very high energy. And there is some reason to believe that this would be possible. It looks like we don't yet have the collider energy to do it, but we might in the next generation or so. But then there's a counter argument to that, which Bostrom has put forth, that the simulators are well aware of what we're doing, and if they don't want us to discover we're in a simulation, then they can just generate extra detail so that experiment says, "Oh, we're not in a simulation."
Fill in the pixelation. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. To me, it's sort of like a Black Mirror type science fiction thought experiments that are fun to think about. Mm-hmm. It seems to me again that it depends on what you plug into the priors to get what you want. By way of example, I wrote one of my Scientific American columns in, when was this? July of 2004, when this book came out called The Probability of God by Stephen Unwin.
Oh, yes.
It was published by Crown, which is a major publishing house. So let me just read his arguments. It's fairly this Bayesian calculations that I have to just kind of grind through it, so it'll take me a couple of minutes. But the point is that it depends on what you plug into the formula to what you get out at the end. Unwin rejects most scientific attempts to prove the divine, such as the anthropic principle and intelligent design, concluding that this, quote, is not the sort of evidence that points in either direction for or against. Instead, he employs Bayesian probabilities, a statistical method devised by 18th century Presbyterian minister and mathematician Reverend Thomas Bayes, who you discuss a lot in the book. Mm-hmm. Unwin begins with a 50% probability that God exists because 50-50 represents maximum ignorance. Then applies a modified Bayesian theorem, P after, so after the evidence is considered, equals P before times D, which is the divine, what does he call it? The divine indicator scale. I'll come back to that. Divided by P before times D plus 100% minus P before. Okay, so let me unpack that. The probability of God's existence after the evidence is considered is a function of the probability before times D, divine indicator scale. 10 indicates the evidence is 10 times as likely to be produced if God exists. 2 is 2 times as likely if God exists. 1 is neutral. 0.5 is moderately more likely if God does not exist. And 0.1 is much more likely if God does not exist. Unwin offers the following figures for 6 lines of evidence. Recognition of goodness, D equals 10. So he means that we have a moral nature. Existence of moral evil, that is, we have our inner demons and evil, why bad things happen to good people, and that whole problem of theodicy. D equals 0.5. Existence of natural evil, earthquakes, famines, things like that, D equals 0.1. Intranatural miracles, like prayers, D equals 2. He thinks they happen just enough that God may be intervening. Extranatural miracles, like the resurrection, just a one-off event, D equals 1. And religious experiences, people have these fantastic visions and so forth. He gives that a 2. Plugging these figures into the above formula in sequence where P after figure for the first computation is used for the P before figure in the second computation, and so on for all 6 Ds. Unwin concludes, quote, the probability that God exists is 67%. Remarkably, he then confesses, quote, this number has a subjective element since it reflects my assessment of the evidence. It isn't as if we have calculated the value of pi for the first time. So here's my skepticism. Indeed, based on my own theory of evolutionary origins of morality and the sociocultural foundation of religious beliefs and faith, I would begin, as Unwin does, with a 50% probability of God's existence, maximum ignorance, and plug in these figures. Recognition of goodness, 0.5. Evidence of moral evil, 0.1. Existence of natural evil, 0.1. Intranatural miracles, 1. Extranatural miracles, 0.5. And religious experiences, 0.1. I estimate the probability that God exists is 0.02 or 2%. Anyway, okay, the point of that long diatribe there is it depends entirely on what you plug in for your priors, and you could just make stuff up, pull numbers out of your hat, and so on. It's fun. It's interesting. I don't know if it's any better than, say, the anthropic argument, the strong or weak anthropic argument, or the intelligent design, the fine-tunedness of the universe. All those, how you count those in a formula like that seems to me so subjective that beyond as a thought experiment that it's fun to think about, I'm not sure what we can use that for.
You kind of get into the same thing with the Drake formula in estimating, the number of intelligent species in the galaxy. If you want to believe there's lots of them and you can shade each particular figure, you can come up with a completely different thing from someone who's trying to be very conservative. So.
Yes, like the prayer. So he counts that as an intranatural goodness or something, intervention or something like that. But after that, Herbert Benson study at Harvard, funded by the Templeton Foundation, with cardiac patients, with the prayed for group, the non-prayed for group, and so forth. There was no difference between the groups. Conclusion was prayer doesn't make any difference at all, as long as you don't know. Because of course there's a placebo effect and so forth. So there, I plug in a much smaller number than his anecdotal number, which I have heard stories about people who got prayed for and their cancer went away or whatever. But again, with the Drake equation, it seems that let's say now we know that every star has planets, and let's say in 50 years we know that pretty much every moon or planet has microbial life. That would change our priors considerably.
Yes, definitely. But still, the big unknown is, first of all, the probability of life originating on a given planet, which, as I say, there's still a lot of debate about that. And of course, the ones about how long extraterrestrial intelligence tends to live and want to communicate with us. With that, you're not looking at astronomy. You're looking at speculations about extraterrestrial motivations and history and so forth.
By the way, why do you think most of this is done by mathematicians and physicists and cosmologists and not, say, sociologists or even theologians or something like that?
Well, it's very striking that it has been astrophysicists, Brandon Carter, J. Richard Gott, Holger Betsch-Nielsen, who have originated the various versions of the Doomsday argument. And I think it really comes down to this Copernican principle. They're used to the idea that we should regard ourselves as probably being at not a special place in space. So it's easy to think, well, maybe we're not at a special place in time. So they're just used to thinking that way. And I think it was natural for God, say, to look at the Berlin Wall and think, my position in this wall's history is not likely to be at the very beginning. It's not likely to be at the very end. And just knowing that allows me to make an inference.
Right. And somebody who's trained in that cognitive style of thinking about problems is more likely to come up with something like a thought experiment like this, or as a social psychologist say, would not come up with something like that. I mean, you wrote books about people that work at Google or what it takes to work at tech companies like that. I mean, you must have a sense that their cognitive style is different from the rest of us.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it's, as they say, the man with a hammer sees every problem as a nail. I think they're very used to thinking in terms of algorithms, and that really affects how they see the world.
Remember when I first met Tipler and I read his book, his book, The Physics of Immortality. It's pretty strongly argued, well written. And, if you follow the sequence carefully, you do kind of arrive at his conclusion. It's like, I'm there, but there's something off about this. I can't quite pinpoint what it is. And so I invited him to Caltech, but I didn't want to give him, when his book came out, I didn't want to just give him a platform without somebody to rebut. No one wanted to, because they didn't want to have to read the book that carefully. Kip Thorne did. Now Kip, he's not really into public debate, stuff like that. He goes, I don't want to have a big on stage thing. And, I like Frank. I don't want, I'll just come and sit in the back. I'm like, okay. So I thought something might happen, and it did. Frank gave his whole pitch, and then, Kip's, he kind of waved me over. So, okay, I got to say something. I'm like, good. So what he argued, well, let me back up and say what Tipler's argument is, that along the lines of what we've been talking about, that if you take the rate of cultural and technological scientific progress, Moore's law, and so on, and you carry that out very far, we will eventually have computers capable of creating a simulation that would be indistinguishable from the real world. And, so that takes them several chapters to get there, but it kind of makes sense. If this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and then he keeps going. And, so that a far future computer, this is the omega point, the omega computer would have enough memory and storage and processing power and so on to create a virtual reality, not just indistinguishable from this reality, but also capable of recreating everyone who ever lived or could have lived. And, okay, why would they do that? Because love would also increase in morality and so on. He has a whole chapter on that. And therefore, this far future omega point computer, which he really calls God, would want to resurrect everyone who ever lived or could have lived. And it doesn't matter that, there's 276 William Poundstones, just slightly different from you, because you're the only one that knows that you're the real one. Even if the others think they're you, it doesn't matter as long as you think you're you. And he goes through all that, and he sort of gets to the end, and therefore the Christian story is true. Jesus was resurrected. It's like, oh God, he ended up right where I thought he wanted to. He started where he wanted to end up. Anyway, Kip Thorne said, okay, each of the segments of the argument, if this is true, and then you go through it, you go, yeah, okay, that's a good argument. And then this will happen. It's like, wait, that little leap there. And he has like 20 of those that have to happen. And so, Kip's point was that it's not at all clear that each of those 20 leaps is even remotely likely to happen. And so you start here and you end up kind of where you wanted to go. Is not at all likely. Anyway, it was a pretty interesting debate. It's online. You can watch that as well as your talk on Sagan that we have. But again, part of I love all these thought experiments, but it just depends on, what your motivation is to get there. But I could see Tipler's cognitive style was so different from mine as a social scientist. Like, wow, how did somebody go down this track? And well, so I kind of interviewed him, and I wrote about that in Weird Things, that he has something of a religious background, and he really, and he has a connection to the Holocaust and the survivors and the people that didn't survive. One day, those people who were killed in the Holocaust will be brought back. And when I talked to him about it, I could tell, there was an emotional element. Like, I want this to happen, and here's how it could happen. He's not calling for a miracle. This is all bottom up science and technology. We'll get there. And I had the same sense about Ray Kurzweil. I don't know if you ever saw there's a documentary film about him called Transcendent Man. It's a very moving film about how he lost his father. His father died at age 51. So Ray was, I think, in his 20s still. So he didn't really know his father as an adult. And he has been kind of pining away his whole life. And he has a basement at his house. They go down to this basement with the camera crew, where he's got like everything his father ever wrote and pictures and so on. He's doing what you were talking about of, like the more digital footprint you have, the more likely the simulation can happen, because we have information to plug into the simulation. And he wants to resurrect his father, not in a miraculous way. He's an atheist or whatever, but that we're going to make it happen. I asked him at some point, is there a God? And he says, not yet. which is that kind of thing you're talking
Yeah.
about, right? If you carry the argument out far enough,
Mm-hmm.
any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, or as I say, any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial is indistinguishable from God. They could do all the things like Frank's far future Omega computer. We would call that God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As they say, when you hear hoofbeats, expect to see horses, not zebras. You should also expect the more probable explanation for what you're experiencing.
Right. So did you encounter that kind of thinking when you were researching this book and talking to these people? You know, they're just sort of big, grand thinkers about the deepest problems, and they're trying to get at it in various ways.
I didn't really see much of it. I mean, in a sense, it's sort of the opposite of that. Instead of looking at what we want to believe, they're kind of looking at what we don't want to believe and saying, can we set a probability on that? Which is kind of an interesting approach and kind of different from what you normally see. So I didn't, really get a sense that these were not, that these were people were driven by emotion. I mean, when you talk to God, he definitely hopes that we will go on and have a long future and that his doomsday prediction will be completely wrong. But he's just saying, what if it isn't? What do we know that can prove it isn't?
Right.
And based on what we've got now, he thinks that we can't prove that there isn't a fairly good chance that human race will end in the next 760 years.
Right. I also wanted to ask you about since you wrote your book on Google and Microsoft, we're now in this world of these algorithms sort of controlling things, including possibly elections and our personal lives and so on. Where do you stand on to what extent these companies have gotten too big, too powerful? In the debate last night, I think it was Elizabeth Warren saying, Google needs to be broken up, that sort of thing. Are you worried about those algorithms and the AI they're using interfering with our individual lives too much?
Yeah, I think everyone's worried about that. Basically, they're using Bayes' theorem to make these predictions from our personal data. And it's kind of like what's happened at a number of times in history. Someone will invent a new type of property and then grab as much of it as they can. In this case, they decided that this personal information that normally, no one owned, it wasn't considered property. But if you encode it into your app, that it's going to save every website you visit, that it's going to save every GPS coordinate on your phone and send it to Google or Facebook or something, that can be very valuable in terms of making these predictions about what you're going to buy, who you're going to vote for. So we're now at this position of trying to decide who really owns this.
Right.
It wasn't something we thought of as property before, the digital age. But now companies are making a lot of money off of it, and I kind of liken it to what we had, in the with the settlement of America and the Native Americans. Tecumseh said, sell the land, you might as well sell the air, sell the water,
Right.
sell the earth. It absolutely made no sense to the Shawnee people that the European immigrants would have their land deeds and say, oh, this land is now ours. But of course, in the long run, that tended to prevail. So I'm concerned that in the long run, personal information is going to be considered private property of the companies that collect it. And I think we're at the juncture where we really have to decide if we want that to be true. And if so, what do we do about it?
Yeah, I think it's huge. In the fact that it wasn't until Zuckerberg famously appeared before Congress. And all these congressmen just seem to have no clue how these companies make so much money. Well, Senator, here's what we do. We sell ads and we sell the data that we collect. And then it sort of dawned on everybody, if it's free online, I'm the product.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, what? I thought it was just free. Yeah, so this is a pretty critical moment, and it is kind of tied to all the stuff your book is about. So when I go on Amazon and I buy a book, which I do often, and then it shows me 20 more that people that bought this book or looked at these books, I actually find that quite helpful. I end up buying a bunch of them, so I know it works for them. Yeah. But that's what you're talking about. It's a Bayesian calculation.
That's a Bayesian prediction. Or when you Google, how to fix a refrigerator, And then suddenly you start seeing ads for refrigerators because they know that most people really can't fix their refrigerator and they're going to be in the market for a new one.
Right. I find that useful, but on the other hand, of course, as we've seen, there's a dark side of that. Now they know a lot about me.
Yeah.
By the way, your Tesla knows where you are. The Tesla people know where you are. I discovered this when I flatted. And of course, as you know, there's no spare tire, so you just call Elon, and he comes out and changes the tire for you.
Very nice.
So I'm on the phone with the service, and they go, "Yeah, okay, we'll send somebody out." I said, "Well, let me tell you where I am." They go, "We know where you are." I went, "Oh, I'm kind of looking up, like, is there a satellite up there looking down at me?" Good thing I'm not like off at a mistress or off at bank robbery or something, because they'll know. And that kind of information. Then I got to thinking. There was, I forget, it was a TED Talk or something about, it was one of these Netflix documentaries on people, on murderers. And I think it was Women Who Kill or something like that. It was one of these odd docs where this woman was talking about how she killed her boyfriend or something like that. And they end up catching her because of her cell phone. She had her cell phone off, but apparently it still pings silently through the towers as you move through, driving around or whatever. So they track it that way. And I got to thinking, in the future, or maybe even now, you really could not get away with something. Your car is going to know where you go. So you couldn't take your car. You could take an Uber, but then the Uber keeps track of everything because it's all through your credit card. They know, and this is like the Chinese program that they're starting to implement now. 1 billion Chinese, 200, 300 million cameras. We're going to know everything you do, say, here, and so on, and then assign social credits. I mean,
even e-scooters are not safe. I'm sure that they know where they are.
Of course they know where they are, because that prevents them from being stolen. So, there's no, other than unless you just, if you had no digital footprint at all and you just walked, I guess that would be the only way, except for street cameras.
Probably they'll have them in shoes, GPS and shoes.
Oh, yes, GPS and shoes. Actually, I think Nike does have that for counting the number of steps that you take.
There you go.
Yeah, so that they probably have a GPS in there too. That's wild. William, this is a great, really fun book, great read. It just came out. Congratulations on it. What are you working on next?
I'm actually working on another interview question type book with sort of logic puzzles and so forth.
You like those?
Yes, a lot of fun. People who have read the previous books keep sending me questions that they've been asked in interviews, so I get a constant, stream of new material.
New material, yeah, it's pretty much endless, just on how these, all these. By the way, since you wrote about game theory, mutual assured destruction, and all that, I mentioned at the top of our interview here, it's worked. Mutual assured destruction has worked in a way. Of course, my doomsayer friends say, "Just you wait." It just one good nuclear war, and your argument is wrong. Well, technically, I guess that's true. But again, as a Bayesian argument, as long as you have both sides don't want to die, and you have a first strike capability is not going to wipe out the other guy's entire armament, then it's going to work. There's no incentive to launch a first strike. And that's
but there's a counter argument to that.
Okay.
It's like the old joke about the optimist who falls off a 100-story building and he crosses the 90th floor and he says, "So far, so good."
Yeah.
So obviously, we have to find that mutual assured destruction has worked until the very moment it doesn't.
Right.
So it's hard to determine much from that.
That's right. So I mean, obviously, it's better to have no nukes at all, and we could get there. I mean, there's the nuclear zero, I think, is the group, and there's arguments of how to get there. I have a chapter on that in the Moral Arc. It's not easy though. The problem is the trust problem. As we've seen with Kim Jong-un, I mean, he's discovered that if you have nukes, the United States will not mess with you like if you don't have nukes.
Yeah.
And he's kind of right. As well as you get a chair at the table with the big boys. They'll respect you. And I can see why Iran probably wants a nuke, although their attitudes toward Israel are very disconcerting, of course, for that reason. But again, I can see how that delicate balance we have. And then if you read like that book, Command and Control, about all the near misses over the last 75 years, and it's pretty scary. I don't know if you saw the film based on that. Where the guy drops the tool in the Titan missile silo, and it bounces off, and and punctures a hole, and the fuel's coming out, and it's filling up with gas, and everybody knows it's going to go off at some moment. It's like he just dropped a tool. I mean, that's a very common human error. So it's obviously not a permanent solution.
Yeah. We tend to underestimate the possibility of human error and just weird accidents like that.
Yeah. Although on the other hand, in terms of when people use the term existential threat, they tend to mean the extinction of the species.
Yeah.
I think that's very unlikely under any of the circumstances: global warming, nuclear war, even a meteor strike. I mean, even the massive, horrible meteor strike 65 million years ago, life flourished fairly quickly after that. Not the dinosaurs, not good for them, but good for other forms of life. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, within weeks they're rebuilding the city, and you would never know if you go there. I've been to Hiroshima. You never know if something like that happened.
Yeah, but the thing is, hydrogen bombs are a totally different thing, and who knows what we'll have 100 years from now. It's kind of scary that when you list all the existential risk that we worry about, like nuclear war, artificial intelligence, climate change, most of these things didn't even have names 100 years ago.
Right.
So who knows what we're going to have in 100 years from now, if we're around.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that study this for a living, full-time studying existential risk, which I'm glad they're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm glad there's a debate between, when Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking say, I'm worried about AI. And then there's a bunch of other super smart people that go, well, I'm not worried about AI. And okay, let's get them in a room and have the conversation. That's worth having. At least we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So, and we're talking about the Doomsday Calculation, your new book, How an Equation That Predicts the Future is Transforming Everything We Know About Life and the Universe. Oh, I forgot to ask you about the multiverse. Let's just run through that argument, why there might be or may not be using the Bayesian calculations.
Well, if you're trying to figure if there are like many, many universes in a multiverse, then there are many more chances for intelligent life to exist, and even for someone exactly like me to exist. So if you try to make a Bayesian argument from that, the chance of me existing or you existing in a single universe is much less than in a multiverse. So a lot of people think that is legitimate reason to think that the multiverse is more probable. But of course, this is, again, one of those controversial arguments.
Especially the version that there's more than one kind of multiverse theory, but the one in which you and I are having this almost exact conversation in another universe.
Yeah.
But I remembered to plug in my computer and we didn't have to pause, or you were in a slightly different room or something like that, and that every possible version of our podcast, of everything that ever happened and so on, to me, that just doesn't pass just kind of the basic practical thinking, I don't know, the smell test or something.
I agree with that. What I think you can legitimately infer from our observation of this very large universe is that obviously we live in a universe large enough that intelligent life exists. I don't think you can jump to the inference that we live in a literally infinite universe where there's an infinite number of versions of you and me and everyone else.
I think so much of this is difficult for us to parse once we kind of hit that epistemological wall of conceiving of things like infinity. And you get these weird puzzles like there's just as many even numbers as there are total numbers. And it's like, how can that be? Because in an infinite string of numbers or something like that. Or an infinite universe, there can't be a beginning, but there was a beginning. You hear these theistic arguments. I just think the way we talk about things or the words we use, the way Wittgenstein talked about, very much limits our concepts of how we can even conceive of these things like free will and determinism. Well, what exactly do you mean by free or determined? And that's why you have all these different positions that philosophers take on that position. Anyway,
if you don't think about it too much, you're free. That's
right. That's right. Yeah. By the way, are you a determinist or a libertarian free willist or a compatibilist, or where do you fall on that?
Again, I think what I just said, maybe it is deterministic, but if you don't think of it that way, and most of the time you don't, that's what you mean by freedom.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, no one thinks about I'm a determinist when they're walking around the world.
Yeah.
They feel like they're making. Anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because that's not what the book is about anyway. We've kind of done that subject to death on this podcast. And well, William, thanks for coming on the show. It's a super interesting book to read. I really loved reading it, and I hope it does well. And good luck on your next projects.
Well, thank you, and good luck on your next.